Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you all for coming down for this special panel discussion today. We are live from Books and Books in Coral Gables, Florida. So a note to our internet audience watching at home, if at any time during the presentation you'd like to purchase a copy of today's book, you can call the number on your screen. We'll take care of that for you. We will get the book signed and we will ship it to wherever you are in the United States free of charge. This afternoon, Books and Books is very happy to welcome back Ms. Joan E. Childs, presenting this panel discussion entitled, You Are Not Alone, 4 Perspectives to Cope with Mental Illness. Ms. Childs has been a practicing psychotherapist here in South Florida since 1978. She is an expert in second stage recovery, codependency, and inner child work. And she provides lectures, workshops, and seminars dedicated to her profession of mental health and women's issues. Joan is also the author of the book, Why Did She Jump? My Daughter's Battle with Bipolar Disorder, which we had the pleasure of having her present here at Books and Books. She's going to be introducing our panelists for us, so will you please join me in welcoming Ms. Joan E. Childs.
Thank you all for coming, especially since we're competing with a dolphin game and a marlin game. And fortunately, we had the cooperation of the weather. So I really am happy to see all of you, some old, some new friends, some colleagues, and some clients. About a little over 2 months ago, July 9th, on a very, very rainy night, I came to do my first book signing and presentation at Books and Books. I was a little overwhelmed because I didn't realize there was such a huge amount of interest in the subject of mental illness, particularly that we're going to cover today, bipolar disorder and suicide. So I think Books and Books was a little astounded also, and we realized maybe the timing, maybe this was the time the universe wanted it to come out of the shadows and out of the stigma that it's had all this time with Robin Williams' recent suicide. And the Miami Herald was kind enough the day before to write a beautiful feature article about my book and what I was trying to do as part of a mission of my life. It was 16 years ago that my daughter Pam, at the age of 34, a PhD clinical psychologist and a licensed clinical social worker, leaped to her death from her father's 15-story window. The reaction, how we all coped with it, my daughters, my sons, her father, my ex-husband, myself, forced me through some kind of muse that I couldn't control. I was just compelled to get up every night because grievers are nocturnal. And I was forced to go to the computer not knowing that I was going to be writing a book. all I was doing was having this personal catharsis. From that came the book. The book being so personal, I didn't really think that it would be something that would be published, so I self-published it. At that time it was called Why Did She Jump? An Angel to Remember. And again, the universe, I always say to my clients and my family members that when a person decides to commit, somehow the universe cooperates. So what happened was somebody way out in California, unbeknownst to me, was looking to make a film about Rodney Dangerfield. And they were looking some information up, some research on Google on his deceased wife, whose name happens to be Joan Childs. So when you self-publish, you automatically get on Amazon. When she saw the book and her daughter was having the same problem, she called me up and she said, I want to make a movie out of your book. It was astonishing. I couldn't even believe what I heard. So that brings us to today. Health Communications, who's the publisher in Deerfield Beach, Florida, took it upon themselves to publish the book. It was released on June 16th, and I began here. Actually, I was at Nova University as well with the Mental Health Association. With the reception that we got, I was asked to create a continuum of something that would bring to the community resources, information, education, in order to get this cloak of shame that I talk about and the stigma attached to mental health out. And the only way that I knew about doing that was to expose it, to let it come out of the woodwork and to hear about how many people need to hear about this. On that particular night, I asked the question I'm going to ask all of you. How many of you know somebody, or maybe know somebody who knows somebody, or has somebody in your family who has mental illness? Raise your hands. I want you to look around. This is what we need to address, and this is why we are all here. I'm delighted with the panel. I'm going to introduce them to you. Dr. Christopher Lariche, who is a psychiatrist, an addictionologist, and a therapist, and the medical director of Lucida Treatment Center in Lantana, Florida. I'm very happy that you'll be here, and he will be talking about the psychiatric orientation or part of how do you treat bipolar disorder. And remember, bipolar disorder is now on a spectrum of bipolar 1 and bipolar 2. He will talk more about that. It used to be called manic depressive disease. My other panel member is Cindy. She is a volunteer patient. And she's one of the most courageous people that are up here right now because she is offering to expose herself and what she's been dealing with under the direction of Dr. Lariche, who is going to interview her as if this was a real session so you can see in vivo what it looks like. Is that correct? Okay. Then I have a psychologist, a good friend of mine, and clinical psychologist and an analyst, Dr. Susan Furman, who is going to talk about the therapeutic approaches to the illness. And then I have my two lovely daughters, Erica Cohane, also an LCSW, and my other daughter, Monica Glassman, who is a very well-known, very well-respected, and some of you must know her, hairdresser in Miami Beach. And these are two of my 5 children. My first one, you know, I lost through the bipolar 1. I don't like to say I lost her through suicide because I think the disease was her executioner, not her. It was not her free choice. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you again to Dr. Lariche. And I think there's a microphone that you have to take, and he will work this through. This is very spontaneous. We're going to ask you to hold your questions so we complete the panel. And then when we are ready for them, raise your hand and we'll take your questions and we will discuss whatever it is that's on your mind. So let's go for it.
Hello everybody. Can you hear me okay? Is this working? Nope.
It is for the live
Oh, it's
streaming,
fine.
not for the room.
So good afternoon. Yeah, this is really for the
Live streaming.
live stream, but so I'll just raise my voice. There's no microphone in the room.
Is it possible to stand?
I'll raise my voice. So I'm Dr. Christopher Lariche. Yeah, this doesn't project. I'm Dr. Christopher Lariche. I'm
sorry, maybe she can let you use her microphone.
It's already attached to there. We're all technically impaired here. Let's.
I'm a psychiatrist, a psychotherapist, and an addiction psychiatrist. I work at a wonderful center up in Lantana, Florida, near West Palm Beach, called Lucida. Some of my colleagues are in the room. Thank you, Jump, for inviting us and putting this together. It
My
was
pleasure.
a wonderful event. We're talking about bipolar disorder today. Bipolar disorder used to be called manic depression. There are long periods of depression. There are periods of mania. The depression outnumbers the mania by about 3 to 1 in general. It's estimated that bipolar disorder runs as a spectrum from the very sort of strictly defined bipolar 1, which is the more severe in the spectrum, to bipolar NOS, or not otherwise specified, which might run, all of them together might run, the estimates are between 3 and 7% of lifetime prevalence. 3 to 7% is quite a lot of people as a lifetime prevalence of bipolar disorder. So for me, and I would tell you this on a personal note, bipolar disorder is a fascinating disorder, a fascinating group of people to treat. There's a lot of research coming out that they are more prone to leadership, that they are more creative than most folks with bipolarity, that they tend to be the leaders in their fields. I mean, if we just talk about the people who have said they have bipolar disorder, Ted Turner says he has bipolar disorder.
Has to be closer to your mouth.
Okay.
That's
Oh, wow. Okay. Excellent.
very close.
So, people that might have people that say they do are Ted Turner, Catherine Zeta-Jones says she does. I don't want to say who said it. Well, folks who have died, who we believe they had it, was certainly Robin Williams. He was one of the most comedic geniuses. He certainly had depression. He didn't say that he had bipolarity, but he certainly has the creative spark. There was a famous, the famous people we believe might have had it were Winston Churchill, Vincent van Gogh, Lord Byron, one of my favorites, John Keats, they believe had it. Even it's been posited that Abraham Lincoln might have had bipolarity. Not sure about that. Kurt Cobain from Nirvana, Amy Winehouse, who just died. One of my favorites, Russell Brand, said, well, he didn't say that, but it was written about him that he did, so hard to say. Charlie Sheen, maybe. Do not know. Don't know. But one of the reasons I see so many folks with bipolarity, because it's very co-occurring with addiction. It's very common that they go together. Also, with suicidality, it's the most common diagnosis that co-occurs with suicidality. In fact, the bipolar mixed state, which is when someone is both depressed and manic together, is the #1 most lethal psychiatric diagnosis. Another thing about bipolarity, and I'll sort of bring out some of the symptoms in a minute, is that it's incredibly heritable. After autism, it's the #1 most heritable mental illness. And in fact, if you have two monozygotic twins, two identical twins with the same DNA, and one of them presents with bipolarity, there's between a 60 and 70% chance that the other will have bipolar disorder in their life as well. So the penetrance of that is really quite high. When we take a history for bipolarity, you always ask for the family history, because there's almost always at least depression in the family, and yet it's one of the most difficult diagnoses to make for us in mental health. It's one of the most difficult, and the estimates are from the first contact with mental health to the time of accurate diagnosis. So the first time they see someone in mental health, maybe a therapist or a psychiatrist, to the time they get an accurate diagnosis of bipolar disorder. Can you guess what the average for that is? We hear 6 years, 5 to 10. Yeah, the estimates are between 8 to 10 years is the average time for a correct diagnosis. In other words, they've been to a bunch of different providers, or maybe with one provider, and often that doctor, therapist, social worker doesn't get it right, or they might go to an emergency room, see the on-call physician there, they end up in a lot of emergency rooms, but it's very difficult to get right. It's a very difficult diagnosis to get right, and yet this is between 3 to 7% of our population, and we're not getting it right.
About 6 million.
Can I address that, because I think that's really important? Let me address that as a therapist, because that's such an important issue. When people come to me, and they generally will come to me before they will come to you. They'll come to me, and after a while, I'll sense something is awry, and I'll refer them to you. But they come depressed. And over the years, these are people we used to label borderline and treat as if they were borderline, which is a personality disorder. And bipolar is a chemical mental disorder that responds to medication and responds to treatment, and these people are fascinating to work with, and they connect and they work with you, and all the things that Dr. Lariche said. But over the years, I've learned through experience and long time from presentation to diagnosis to ask the right questions. Because when people come depressed, you don't ask if 15 years before they were acting out sexually, or take maybe a real good drug and alcohol history. But I just wanted to throw that in because I think that's crucial.
Yeah, it's key, and it goes to the heart of part of the problem, which is it's so hard for our clinicians to identify it. You know, it's really tough.
I just want to add one word to that. I have the comorbidity factor, that it mimics so many other mental illnesses, mental disorders, that it's very hard to get a differential diagnosis.
Yeah, it is. If you think about the depressive episodes outnumber the manic episodes by about 3 to 1 in bipolar 1 disorder. Generally, in the manic episode, they don't want to see a doctor because they're feeling too good. And there are only 2 illnesses that I know of where a patient enjoys the illness so much that they don't want to get treatment, and that is mania and active addiction. They don't want to do it. So perhaps we should move to actually sort of an example of what questions I might ask to get to the heart of a bipolarity. So usually a patient presents, they might have, again, they usually present with some depressive symptoms, and there are a bunch of different, the course of an illness. So the course of illness and mental health, you sort of begin at the first onset of the symptoms of this episode, but you also go back to the very beginning of when the onset happened. And in bipolarity, the onset generally happens in sometime before 19. About 65% of the patients before the age of 19 have their first symptoms, and about 30% before the age of 14. So it happens earlier in life, and whereas major depression, which is not manic depression, it's just major depression, tends to happen 30 and above. So it happens sort of later in life. And another thing about bipolarity is it happens with an equal prevalence in men and women. So 1-to-1, men to women, across cultures, across languages, across societies. And in major depression, it's 3-to-1, women to men. So major depression is much more common in women, and bipolarity is really even. Now again, so bipolar disorder is characterized by a manic episode, which is really, you know, and I've come to, I had a very humbling experience with a brilliant friend of mine who started to tell me about the internal subjective experience of this incredible creative surge that she had. She's an artist, conceptual artist, gallerist, and she started creating. She started sleeping less. Her mind was teeming with ideas, just flooded with ideas. In fact, she didn't want to sleep because she wanted to stay awake for these ideas which were coming in. This is she and I were hanging out in cafes there in Wynwood and just talking over several days, and slowly this built together this picture. And she started to see patterns unfold, patterns both financially, politically, in the art world. She's an artist. And she could see things happen before they happened. And she started to take action on these and predict them. She totally changed the face of art in her country. Within a very short period of time, less than 6 months, she had opened 100 galleries, 100 new galleries, producing new artists, had the president of her country come to her gallery, had people flying in. A very famous film director from this country flew in to see her gallery. And this was all during this time of around 6 months of incredible activity. And she knew that what she envisioned would happen. She did it again and again and again. And it was really one of the most extraordinary experiences I've had as a psychiatrist, because I realized slowly, wow. She got to a point where she said she felt she was in communion with really the greatest minds in history, and she was just exchanging ideas with them, and that her mind was not her mind, it was just mind, and it was connected to everything. And I said, this is actually absolutely the most sublime thing I've ever heard. And I realized, yes, perhaps you could put a label on this and call it, you know, bipolar disorder, but it was so much greater than that. I mean, it was absolutely transcendent. And it was then I really started to question my own understanding of it as a disease label. And I thought, well, wow, these are people who are just the geniuses, really the geniuses of our society. A study just came out last month that people with bipolarity and their first-degree siblings have much higher leadership qualities than other people. And this is true. We see it again and again. And I began to really envy my friends with bipolar disorder. I said, wow, how do you do it? I mean, not how do you do it, but I just envied their mind. I mean, it was incredible. But one of the things I said again and again is, yes, your mind is transcendent. It is of another order, absolutely. And yet, your body is, unfortunately, a physical body. And you have to do boring things to a physical body, like feed it, let it sleep, exercise it, wash it, again, put it to sleep, because folks with bipolarity don't want to let their body sleep. And it's kind of boring. You have to take care of this body while this mind is just absolutely transcendent. And, you know, and that sort of works with people, but I just have an incredible admiration and awe of people with, again, it's almost like seeing a bird fly and saying, that's called flight, and the experience of flying. They're so different, but and yet we refer to it with the same word, which is bipolar disorder. You speak to someone who's had a manic episode, and they won't express it like that.
I guess I'm reacting in a bit that it's almost like you're idealizing. And that concerns me because I deal with younger bipolar patients, young men in college. And I watched one young man who started a business in his dormitory and was making all kinds of money. And he purposely did not sleep because he was making too much money, and he was doing this all night and then going to school during the day. And then watching him gradually just burn out and go over the edge. You know, and another young man that was flying from country to country, importing the most amazing things. I don't know how he thought of them. One of them was artificial vaginas for transsexual individuals. And he was taking them to Brazil. But they have amazing minds, but it can become so destructive if it's not reined in. So I would hate to idealize it.
Why don't we begin with...
Your point is very well taken, and absolutely. Anyway, we'll have more to say. So let me ask. So I'm going to ask a couple questions that I would ask a patient who presents it to me, and when I go into the mood symptoms, I would certainly go and ask the following questions. Actually, let me just pull this up. Ask the following questions. So, and Cindy has graciously granted to answer sort of in a stylized fashion, but we'll do it this way instead of going through all the criteria. So, how have you been feeling over the past several weeks?
You have to give her the mic. Or just hand it to her, the whole...
The past few weeks I've been pretty low on the totem pole. Feeling hopeless and depressed with no cure in sight. Sometimes suicidal, ideations, and don't know where to go from here.
And so when you say depressed, a lot of people use that word, but what is that for you? What do you experience?
Depressed to me is having that dark cloud over your head, not seeing the sunshine, not wanting to face daylight, being around other people who are depressed, not wanting to socialize, wanting to isolate, having no energy, and feeling like you're running out of time as you get older.
What about your sleep, your appetite, your motivation to do things, and pleasure that you take in anything?
Sleep is a big problem for me. I take medication, which is not working. I'm going for a sleep study tomorrow night, as a matter of fact. So maybe I don't have to take pills. Maybe there's some other solution. But my mind is always busy thinking about a million things at once. Appetite went away for a while, but unfortunately it's come back. So the positive side to it was weight loss, since I do have an addiction to food, and that does mask the feelings. Also, you can keep a smile on your face and fool the world. Nobody would know that I've been through these feelings or that I'm feeling as low, but I keep a smile on my face, and I fight it daily. My brother, who's truly bipolar, expressed it one day to me like being blind your whole life, and then one day you wake up and you can see, and that's what mania was for him. I haven't reached that moment of happiness yet. I just find ways to numb myself and get through life, but without pleasure.
And just as a parenthesis, you know, I would go much more into all of the things she's saying, but for the purpose of this activity. And when you said you had suicidal ideations, can you tell me more? Did you have specific thoughts or specific scenario, specific plan? Can you tell me more about that?
I never thought that I'd be capable of trying anything. I had thoughts of, or fantasies of leaving this planet. I just thought it would be a happier place to be. And thank you. Back in April, I woke up one morning and took an overdose. But luckily, my brother was home. I reached out for help. I made a phone call. And I'm here today. And I chose at that time to go through ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy. It does affect your memory somewhat, but it did bring me around. And I do feel somewhat brighter. I can't say that those thoughts have gone away totally, but at least I'm not burdened by them on a daily basis. So.
And so in April, you say you had an overdose. Now, can you tell me, leading up to the overdose, you know, is this something that was sort of a spur of the moment decision for you, that, you know, you started to feel so bad that you said, okay, I have to just take something or do something? Or was it something that you spent a long time kind of thinking about and leading up to, and you drove somewhere else where no one could find you? And can you tell me just more of the details?
I had been hinting around for a little while as a joke. Oh, maybe I'll just take some pills and get it over with. And I do live with my brother at the present moment. Work was becoming very difficult for me. The computer was very taxing. I had had an accident at work the year before, and it just seemed like the bills were gathering up, and whichever way I turned, there was physical pain, emotional pain, hopelessness, financial difficulties. I just didn't see my way out. And many times I would look at the pills and fantasize about taking them. I would actually pour them all out into my hand and then put them back in the bottle and not do anything. And I had done that prior. And then this one morning, I just had enough. And I was hoping to end the pain.
And when you realized that you'd survived the episode, what was your reaction?
Going through the ECT, I did not recall how serious I was. My girlfriend Ilana, who's in the audience, told me she was so scared that she had lost me. My boyfriend Elliot witnessed, but I myself really don't remember how really bad it was. Still being around, it took a lot of work to get from the hospital bed back home through the remaining ECTs, a couple more weeks at home, being led around, like, you know, you can't drive, you forget that you saw this movie a month ago or went to dinner with this person. You feel very unstable. I don't know if I could actually say that I'm disappointed that I didn't succeed. I don't think I am, because I'm here today, so I guess there is a big part of me that loves life and wants to live, but it's just a daily battle that wears you down.
And why would you not try it again? What keeps you alive?
That's a good one. Hi, Lana. What keeps me alive? I couldn't tell you honestly that 100% I wouldn't try it again, to be honest.
Thank you.
That's what I was thinking too. I mean, the reason to live is to make the world a better
That's why I'm
place.
here today.
That's clearly why you're here today.
Thank
That's
you.
why I'm here today.
Say
Great
what- say it.
pleasure in knowing that. We find joy in knowing that you can help others in this room. I wanted to say it, so I'm glad you said it.
Say it.
I mean, my heart goes out to so many people who suffer. And,
And being willing to talk about it
yep,
is the only way it's ever going to be fixed.
I have it in my family. I lost two first cousins to suicide. I have friends who suffer from it. I have the biggest heart for other people, but when it comes to myself, I seem to be my worst critic, and I'm very hard on myself.
Keep you alive by being here.
And it was difficult,
You're
but
wanting to be alive because you're going to represent and you're going to change the world.
I'd love
make it
to.
a better place.
so I have to stay here.
So let me just ask one last question. And this is perhaps the longest question you'll ever hear in your life. So it's a very long question. So you have to kind of wait. I'm going to paint a tableau with words and let me finish the whole canvas. And when I'm finished, then you say, let me think.
remember what you asked.
Okay. So the question is this. Have you ever in your life, over a period of 3 or 4 or longer days during which you didn't have too much need to sleep, you had extra energy, so 4 days or longer during which you didn't need to sleep, you had extra energy, did the following ever happen to you? You felt on top of the world, possessed by this sense of destiny, as if normal rules didn't apply to you, and your mind was racing, and you were distracted and more outgoing than usual, and you were doing lots of impulsive things, like spending lots of money, driving really fast, starting lots of projects, lots of new projects, maybe having more sex than usual, getting into arguments or new situations, and other people noticed a change in you. They noticed this was different, and all of this happened over a period of 4 days or longer with less need for sleep and more energy.
I had tried a new medication a few years back called MSAM, the patch. And how I described that to my doctor at the time reminded me of the movie Awakening, where for the first time in my life, and I'm 59 now, and this was when I was maybe 50 or so, for the first time in my life I had feelings of happiness. Unfortunately in the movie it doesn't last long.
And the spending.
The spending, I would be busy running from place to place, filling the void with buying things. I'd be up at night, I did have racing thoughts. I can't say that it was a truly manic episode because I have lived around that with my brother. So where he's bought 4 cars in a matter of 2 days, he connects with the beyond. I don't know that I've ever communicated with, them. So can't say I'm not a true bipolar. I don't even know where the line is. But as far as manic episodes like that, where I run for 4 days with no sleep, no eating, sweating, but talking, I remember he was talking so quickly once that he stopped talking and he took my lipstick and would write words on the mirror because his brain couldn't keep up, or his mouth couldn't keep up with his brain. So that I have not experienced. But the hyperness, the talking quickly, the running around, the spending, the eating, the nonstop mental thinking about a million things, so therefore I can't sleep at night. That I've experienced.
So just for the purposes, first of all, thank you. Thank you so much.
And I would also like to thank Joan for giving me this opportunity, because she's been my therapist for years. It's been a while since I've seen her, but we reconnected for another reason, and then all of a sudden this happened. So she has saved my life in the past, and through her love and guidance continues to do that. So I need to say thank you to Joan.
That was awesome. That was such a fabulous interview. So give me your card. I have people to send to you. That really was a very impressive interview. And thanks, and unfortunately, because of insurance companies, you probably don't get to do a lot of therapy anymore. I'm sure you're very good at it. You are awesome. There's such a stigma around mental illness. Robin Williams was very upfront about his addiction, but not so upfront about what his friends really believed was bipolar. The congressman, Diaz-Ballard, whose son committed suicide, unfortunately, last year, said that he felt that love was enough, and love is not enough. And if by being on the panel he was on, one person is helped, then it's worth it. Your courage is amazing. To have someone who has the courage and the grace to speak so beautifully and honestly, you've helped everybody in this room. So thank you.
I'm going to say something too.
And this is the point to which you would be sent to me. And I would be so glad you came. And I would say it sounds like you've been hopeless. You've been through so much. The struggle has been depleting. And tell me more about it. And help you to see how that depression has impacted your relationships, the way you see the world, and just in a way tainted your vision, and how you are so capable of a rebirth. And I would want that for you.
Thank you. Before we pass that to my daughters, who are the representative of the family members, they are the sisters of their sister whose life was who lost her life, as I said, 16 years ago. I just wanted to give you some just general statistics about what Cindy was expressing, and you saw the affect that she was in. And thank you for honoring her honesty and for being so real, because there's a lot of people here you don't know. And when Cindy was the fourth person I asked to be the representative of the patient. It's very hard to do this because this is going to be live streamed. So there's going to be all over the world people seeing this, and she put herself right out there. You probably did more good today than a lot of people will go for years for therapy, because you exemplify, you embrace the shame. And by embracing the shame, you are healing, you are a representative of healing. I want to tell you that over 1 million people a year attempt suicide. 1 million people. 40,000 make it. 40,000 people a year commit suicide. There are more suicides than there are homicides, motor vehicle accidents, and drug deaths. More than that. More men than women, although 4 times more women will try, but more men make it. The ages, it's the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and the 2nd leading cause of death between the ages of 15 to 24. Every 13 minutes, somebody is committing suicide in this country. And there are 22 vets a day that commit suicide. So this is as big a problem as cancer, heart disease, strokes, all of the medical illnesses that can happen. This is a brain disease. So we need to bring it out of the woodwork. We need to look at it. It can happen to anyone, and it has. Robin Williams is a perfect example of having money, having fame, having love. And like you said, Susan, love alone is not enough, doesn't cure this illness. So I just wanted you to have a few statistics to see how important this is, and this is why all of us, my daughters, all of us are here today. My daughter, Monica, has asked me to not speak. She doesn't want to speak because it frightens her to be in public speaking like a lot of people, but I can tell you she has a lot to say. But she said she'll speak if you ask her a question. My daughter, Erica,
I mean, this is not my profession, it's all of your profession.
it's your life, it's your experience.
I experienced the loss of my
You don't need a
sister, which,
profession.
you know, is so of course my sister hands it to me. So I'm here to answer any questions from if you guys have experienced a family member, you know, who lost a family member or is experiencing watching their illness and not being able to help them and what you can do. My story is not a pretty story. My sister died. But if I can be helpful in any way from what I've learned from her illness, what I would have done differently today if I would have known what it would do to her, then I will be as helpful as I can to answer those questions for you.
What would you have done differently?
What would I do? One of the first things I think I would have done, knowing that it would take her life, is take her out of a city that is full of darkness away. I would have probably moved her to a place of a simple lifestyle. Because I think the energy that is in a big city is too much, too many obstacles that get in the way of the self and spiritual growth. And they're not able to see past that. They're just, their reality is so real, even though you think they may be, the reality is very different. And even though we think that it's, I don't want to say crazy because they're not crazy,
crazy is a
but
good word.
Their reality.
it is their reality. And speaking of what your brother saw beyond, my sister saw that. She predicted 9/11. She saw things every day. She would pray to me that she felt like Satan was going to take her life. And every day I would hold her and tell her, look, you're here another day. He didn't take your life. He's not taking it. But it didn't matter because every day she felt he was going to take her life. He felt that he tainted her medication that I had to make her take every day towards the end of the last 3 months of her illness. So the more awareness I got, when I would go to North Carolina, it's a very simple place to live where people are kind. You look at the beautiful mountains and the beautiful flowers, and you walk into an antique shop and you see somebody who's flighty and a little bit kooky, but she's living a normal life and she is working a normal job and she's helping people and she's doing what she loves and she's not surrounded by darkness. She's surrounded by light and love. And I think that would be the first thing I would have done because I felt that the city we lived in was too dark and people were too selfish and they didn't really, they were too self-absorbed to really look at my sister and say, get over it, just get over it. And you can't just get over it. You wouldn't tell somebody with cancer to get over it. It's cancer of the brain. And so that would have been the first thing I would have done.
I do want to mention one thing on my daughter's comment. My daughter was a PhD clinical social worker and worked for the John Bradshaw Center in California and saw nothing but trauma. Nothing but trauma. Adult children of dysfunctional families, adult children of alcoholics, children that grew up in cults that saw, that were witnessing human sacrifice, children that were beaten, children that were abandoned, children that were verbally abused, sexually abused. She was in that hub every single day taking on that negative energy. And just like the movie The Green Mile, that prisoner that took on all of the toxicity of the other prisoners. If you remember the movie, he blew it out. He had a way of blowing it out. My daughter just didn't have a container well enough. She was 24 years old when she was working with this kind of a client. And I think what Monica is saying, that she didn't have enough boundaries to protect herself. Had she been in a climate, maybe, now we don't know, because if bipolar is there, it's there. Maybe that wouldn't have been an exacerbation, or maybe it wouldn't have been something that would have triggered it, because my daughter did not take drugs. She was one of these purists. And she would, she was using an osterizer to blend vegetables before they became a thing to do. So she did work in an environment that was very, very toxic, and you're right. That might have precipitated it, but I do believe that it was there lying dorm. And I don't think that, just like what you said, Susan, that love, all the love in the world, because she had it from all of her family. She had all the love you could give anyone. And the reason she was living with my daughters, they both lived together, because she wasn't living with me. And the reason she wasn't living with me is because she was hallucinating and she saw demons around me. She was scared to live with me. So my two younger daughters, and they were young at the time. I mean, they're still young, but they were 16 years younger than they are now. They had to handle this on a day-to-day basis. And they would call me, Mom, we got to do something. What are we going to do? And the sadness about this is 16 years later, it isn't much different. There was no place for her to go for long-term treatment. There still isn't, right.
Especially here.
South Florida Hospital, psychiatric hospital, was closed. And she'd never met the criteria because of her lousy insurance. It was an HMO. So I really blame the system as much as I blame anyone for the fact that she fell through the cracks. And if she didn't have her two sisters, Monica and Erica, who lived together and took her in, she would have been homeless like all the other homeless people out there. 99% of them are not lazy. 99% of them are sick. So my daughters were taking care of an active bipolar 1 who was not compliant and wouldn't take her medicine half the time. And these were the two girls that had to live with that because there was no place to put her.
I was very angry that I had to force my sister to take that medicine. She cried, and I should have not been the one to make her take that medicine. But she looked at me for safety and security, and I got angry at both my parents because they really should have been the ones that were doing this, not me. She was the younger of the two, so of course I'm always the caretaker in the family, so I took that role over. But I didn't know how to help her. I used to pray to God every night. Is this her life? Is it ever going to change? Is she ever going to get better? So there's a part of me that there's such sadness that she's gone, but she's no longer suffering. Mm-hmm. And she is that angel above looking over us. And hopefully her passing will help other people heal from their illnesses. And that's what my mom's whole book is about, and trying to better the world that we live in today. So.
Again, you're being here to tell us about it is also good.
That's why I'm here. My brothers are not. They wouldn't, but we are. So we speak for them, too. You want to say something?
I'm not really sure that there's much more I can say.
I have a question. Oh, I'm staying from that. My name is Lanita, and I have a daughter who is probably more bipolar than schizophrenia that everybody analyzes her as. So she flies to Amsterdam, drives to Mexico. The schizophrenic can't do that. But your mother said there's no place for them to go. And we have been realizing that, especially in Miami-Dade County, Carla, who is sitting up front, and both of us are together. We started a place called Key Clubhouse. Hi, Marilyn. So we, 7 mothers, started a place called Key Clubhouse for people with bipolar and schizophrenia to go during daytime, spend the day with others where they're not judged, and they learn how to work. But they still don't have a place to live. So I would take this opportunity to say that you're so right. And I wish, because staying home, as you said, Mom is not the place to stay. And I just started housing for mentally ill 4 months back. And I'm having a hard time developing it. But that's what we need, more of independent housing where they can live without stress and protected.
Erica, why don't you say a few words about your experience with Pam being Erica is the 4th of my 5 children. And there was a time that I was divorced when I was really unavailable to my 5 children. In all seriousness, I abandoned them because I had to go to work. And I was very dependent on each of them helping one another. And they referred to Pam as the engine of the train. And she sort of became a surrogate mother to replace my absence. My absence wasn't playing tennis or bridge. I had to help put a roof over my kid's head. But in reality, they were kids, so they didn't see mom. I wasn't there. That was their reality. Now, as adults, they could put the picture together. But they suffered tremendously because there were 5 of them, and I was gone. I was trying to, they didn't know about Florida Power and Light and about a mortgage, but somebody had to keep that roof going. So there was a lot of anger, as like you heard, my daughter said she thought it was the mother and father's job to take care of this sick child, and she's right, 100% right. We did the best that we could do with the resources that we had. And I just want to say this, that I was in California last week at the Beverly Hills Library, and I did the same sort of thing with a different panel. And a gentleman stood up at the end and asked this question. He said to me, he said, this question is for you, Joan. Did you ever think that you may have been the cause of your daughter's suicide? Everybody gasped just like you did. And did you ever think that maybe you were perhaps responsible for her illness? It took me a moment for the heat to go away because I wanted to be a professional and answer it right. And I said, there isn't a mother or perhaps a father who's lost a child who didn't think that they might have done something that may have been responsible or irresponsible that could have in some way caused, or if they had done something different, may not have caused. The what ifs. What if I did this? What if I didn't do this? It came in every day of my life. I saw the picture, the video of my daughter jumping out of her father's apartment every single minute. I stood in the shower for hours with the water running, with my eyes just crying. But I don't think there's a parent alive who lost a kid, whether it was for suicide, whether it was murder, whether it was cancer, that doesn't think they could have done something. But no, I do not blame myself for her death or her disease. I am not powerful enough to cause bipolar disorder. I am not powerful enough to cause suicide. I'm not powerful enough to cause cancer, strokes, heart attacks, automobile accidents. So the audience, of course, really welcomed my response, and I'm saying it because it was so profound. I want you to be able to have a chance to say something about your experience before we take more questions.
Well, Pammy was my caretaker, with my mother being away, understandably, but as a child, I certainly didn't get it at that point. And Pammy really took both my sisters in. I'm the 4th child, but I'm the baby girl. So it was very difficult for me to see her in a light where she was sick. And so, I followed, I role modeled not after just my mother, but after Pam in the same profession, because I was so enamored by both of their work. So to see Pammy in that kind of a light it just never felt real to me. And for me, it was like I never doubted that she would get better. So there was like, I was in my, you're like in a fantasy. So, the question was asked, what would you do differently? I don't know. I felt very helpless to help her. I don't know that there was anything I could have done differently, but I wish I could have seen it more for what it was, because through the eyes of a younger.
There's not a day that goes by that I don't think of my daughter. Not a day. Am I grieving anymore? No. Am I mourning? No. I've passed it 16 years, but there's not a day that I don't think of my little girl and what she did to help me and the times that were my trials and tribulations. And part of the reason I'm doing this today, and part of the reason I asked my daughters, is because I want to keep her, I want to give meaning to her life and to her death. And it's a way for her in her death, where she's sitting in the kingdom of heaven, I think, to help, to continue the help through me. I feel like she was the one that pushed me to the computer. And I heard her say in my voice, in my head, just keep writing, Mom, just keep writing. It doesn't matter, just keep writing. I was journaling. So this is the reason we're all here. This is the reason that Elements Behavioral Health and Lucida is here, because they have a wonderful treatment program in Lantana that has a track for trauma. Not only trauma, but I'll let you say any more that you want to say about it. I just wanted to give my daughters a chance, even 16 years later, when she thinks of Pammy. And there are some people in the audience right now that knew my daughter, and there are tears in their eyes, because she was an angel, a real angel. And I believe that I gave birth to an angel.
I just think it's a universal experience to feel, to be in an experience where you have somebody you love and to watch them go through. I mean, I saw Pammy go from, you know, being the PhD and this wonderful, amazing, powerful therapist, because I did a group with her, to becoming a child who lost herself. And, you know, shortly before she passed away, just seeing her diminish in that way was extremely difficult for me. And so it's you know, I just really connect with the idea of that not being able to do anything to help her. So I'm, of course, grateful that this exists and that you're doing this. And I do feel that Pammy continues to do her work through you and through me. I feel I'm doing a lot of work with regards to healing work. And, you know, I feel like my sister's behind that. So there is a message here. And I'm grateful for all of you for coming. And so grateful to you for sharing your story. Thank you.
Let me just say also that this live streaming may go off at 5 o'clock. So if it does, it's still on. Okay, they're just live streaming for an hour. But we're going to continue to take your questions and discuss this very important subject.
I'd like to talk about family therapy, because for everyone who has an illness, there are 7 people involved. And you can see how it's impacted a whole family. And one of the things that I truly believe in is working with families, with or without the person who is sick, to really help them communicate the way these people communicate. It's hard to be honest about your feelings. And it's hard to say you're mad at your mother or you're mad at your father. And it's crucial. And there's so much that can be done in a group, working with families, that heals so much and heals damage from years and years and years back. So it's a really, really powerful tool.
If you have a question, please ask who you'd like to ask it to, because we have to pass the mic around. Okay. This gentleman. Doesn't matter. Okay.
We have you first.
Okay.
Especially to the lady that said that she had it in the family. The question is,
You, Cindy.
to you, whether there is evidence about behavioral or genetic correlation between people like you and your other family members, whether it is genetic, DNA, or behavioral. And if there is such evidence, what can be done about it to ameliorate or deal with the problem effectively?
Well, I know that there is a genetic connection. What I found out in my family, I don't know if it's true, but we have a set of great-grandparents that married that were first cousins. Now I've asked people, therapists, doctors, if there's a relationship to the amount of mental illness in my family and that specific episode, and I have heard yes. But all of my first cousins have something going on. My sister is a recovering alcoholic who was in a coma for 4 months and almost died. My brother is presently starting ECT this week for depression, not leaving the house for 4 months. Because for the bipolar, there seems to be a lack of a middle ground. It's either you're high and you're manic or you're low and you're depressed. And we're always fearful that when he's getting better, we're afraid he's going to go over to the other side. So it's kind of like a catch-22. It's almost like I feel more comfortable when he's home and sleeping all the time, which I hate to say that, and depressed, but it's better and safer than the mania. So as far as genetics, I've heard yes, definitely, and my family is a true example of that because it's everywhere. So.
question is for the panel and the audience too, because it seems like there are a lot of people here that have experiences like you.
So, so bipolar disorder is the most heritable psychiatric disorder after autism. And I mentioned this in the beginning, but in identical twins, between 60 and 70% of if one twin has bipolar, the other twin will also develop it in his lifetime. Now, it's certainly something we carry. There are a multitude of genes that we think is multifactorial, and whether each gene contributes or not kind of adds up to the picture of bipolarity, and where on the spectrum of bipolarity it falls towards the more severe end, which is the bipolar 1, or the other, just the spectrum. One of the things we always look for in the family history is a history of suicide in the family, or suicide attempts, a history of addiction in the family, a history of depression, anxiety in the family, even undiagnosed. Because remember, a generation ago and 2 generations ago, it was much less diagnosed, and even today, it's poorly diagnosed. One of the most troublesome diagnoses we have. So that's what we carry in our genes. But then, once we're born, we're not these machines that dutifully carry out everything in our genes. There's what happens to us after birth. And I use the example of if you're born with very fair skin, freckles, red hair, you're more vulnerable to getting sunburned. But that doesn't mean you're going to get sunburned. You can do a lot of things to prevent getting sunburned. Stay out of the sun, put on sunblock, you can wear hats. Doesn't mean you will, but you are more vulnerable. So this opens the whole field of what's called epigenetics, what happens after we're born, what unlocks certain things in our genes which lead towards disease or which lead towards resilience. And so some of the things that we've seen in the early life, and we spend in our center, Lucida, we spend a lot of time looking at the early life of the person. And we take a very detailed early history or psychodevelopmental history. So what we've seen through really fantastic research, a lot of it was done at Emory University with a great crew out there at Emory, is that a bunch of different things, if they happen in early life, lead to changes, lasting changes in different systems in our body. So for example, early parental separation or separation of parents. Parents get divorced and one leaves, doesn't come back. Early parental separation or loss. Violence or abuse in the family, so if there's sexual, physical abuse. Neglect, neglect and deprivation, which really goes under considered. There's a lot of neglect. I had everything. My parents were great. They gave us everything. But did you feel loved? Did you have a sense of self-esteem? Well, we had everything, but yeah, they kind of left me there. So also deprivation or emotional neglect, violence or domestic violence in the household, untreated mental illness in the household, addiction in the household, incarceration. All these things add up to a diathesis or a picture of vulnerability later in life. And it causes vulnerability and changes which we can measure in your stress system, which is basically the cortisol system, the stress hormone system. We can test somebody who had early life adversity 20, 30, 40 years later. And we can take out the spinal fluid and measure their cortisol 20, 30, 40 years later. And we can see a difference between the two groups, one who had early trauma, one who did not have early trauma. The group with early trauma is much more susceptible to addiction, anxiety, and mood disorders, suicidality. There are wonderful studies now. I encourage you all to look at the ACE study, ACE study, and look at what they did. It's absolutely amazing. They have a wonderful, wonderful website. And it's they've started it in Kaiser Permanente in Southern California, and they replicated all over the United States and the world, basically looking at early trauma. The other thing that we see, and this just came out, is that in very early, now this really blew me away, because it just came out several months ago, in victims of childhood sexual abuse, women who had childhood sexual abuse, years later, and I'm talking 20, 30, 40 years later, in the corresponding part of their cerebral, what's called the somatosensory cortex, or the part of the cortex that senses, I touch my arm, part of my somatosensory cortex lights up. In the genital part of the somatosensory cortex of someone who had abuse 20, 30 years ago, they have atrophy. They have a shrinking of their cortex. And we can measure this through cortical thickness, cortical thinning. And we've seen this across many brains. So there's something even in the architecture of the brain that responds and shuts down. We think it's a kind of gating mechanism, a kind of blocking, this is toxic stimulus, let's stop this and not have any more. And there's a shutdown of it. So even on the biological level, we know it from the neuroendocrine level, which is the cortisol hormone. We know it from the biological level of measuring the cortex. But there are lasting sequelae to early life trauma, early life adversity as well. So it's genetic, it's what's called epigenetic, or what comes after just our genes. And then it's the environment in which you live as an adult. So I can go into nerd space, but I will cut it short.
All that is so true. And what can we do about it? A lot of things we can't do anything about, but we can have early intervention. We can do everything we can for a healthy life, for nutrition, for stress management, for family communications, for personal growth and therapy. We can change the environment that this child and children are raised in so that they don't have one trauma after another. Because if a bipolar parent is raising a bipolar child, just think of how that attenuates what's going on. And yes.
I didn't want to interrupt you. Not at all. Because I want to offer what you can do here and now. You especially, you and your brother, if you would join forces with us.
Well, why don't we keep that?
I'm going to invite
yeah,
everyone in the room to join forces with us, because we were 6 parents that started 7 years ago with $94. And we started 7 years ago researching what we could do. My peers, Marilyn, Lolita, we found a model that's working all over the world. It will help you and your brother if you'll come to us. Trust me. But we need all of you. We need all of you to get behind this model, not our little space, the model, and changing the way mental health care is delivered in Miami-Dade County, because it's virtually non-existent.
There is no care.
There is no continuum of care here in Miami-Dade County. This is a start. We've been open for 4 years. Our vision is to Lalita single-handedly doing housing on her own with her own dime, trying to create that community that you referred to, the community of safety and lack of stress, so that they can be nurtured and taken care of. But you're functioning so well, frankly, that I know if you came to the clubhouse, you'd feel better immediately. The clubhouse keeps, well, within days. I mean, it keeps me going.
Stand up so we can hear you.
Could I just to follow up on the question of what we can still do, and I promise we'll make that happen in just a sec. So excuse the excursion into nerd space. So back to what we do in treatment decisions. So there are so many things we can do in treatment decisions. One of the things we found is if there's early life trauma, these patients as adults respond much better to psychotherapy heavy treatments than to medication treatments. And we know this from outcome measures. We now know we now know the reason why. And so a lot of the time we spend is looking carefully at the early life so that we can do a treatment plan that's based on the latest science, the latest things that we know. So what can you do for, very difficult bipolarity, for example? So, medication is an important piece, but it's certainly not all of the problem. There are medications for people who are very resistant to it that you can inject for a whole month, and they stay in your body for a whole month. So they really only go once, and they get medication for a month. But then there are other ones. There's a whole movement now of neuromodulation, which is stimulus to the brain, directed stimulus. And I have to say, ECT, which is electroconvulsive therapy, years ago, we had very little data about what it did. So what we would do is invoke a seizure in the whole brain, across the whole body, and there were good outcomes, but it was very kind of rough. It was a very rough illness. And now they have just one part of the brain and one side of the brain where they really focus it down. Yours might have been two-sided or one side. I'm not going to ask here, but very, very focused ECT. And it's by far the most effective of all the treatments. And with the few side effects. Now, one of the side effects is amnesia just around the time of the treatment. But there are others which are less invasive. There's one called there's one called RTMS, repetitive transcranial magnetic stimulation. So it's a little magnet, and they shoot it through a part of the skull, directing it directly at the correct spot where the intractable or treatment-resistant depression happens. There are other what's called neurostimulation approaches. These are the two that are that are really the most effective. The one I just told you about, the magnetic one, is called RTMS, was just approved by Medicare in New England, and you're going to see a lot of the RTMS pop up all around the United States because it's for 45 to 60 minutes a day in something like a dentist's chair for 5 days a week for 4 weeks, and you drive home after the treatment. So you go in, you stay there for 45, 60 minutes, and you drive home. So the side effects are very minimal, and it's for treatment-resistant depression. So there are many. Now these are just the medical and biological ones. Then, we've heard about the milieu therapies or the surrounding therapies, the family treatment, the lifestyle changes, including diet changes. There's even fish oil has been quite effective with bipolarity, but it was just found in association with prostate cancer. Fish oil just came out positively associated with prostate cancer, so we have to be careful. But there are many, many treatments coming out, and a lot of it is based on, number one, an accurate diagnosis. So that's very key. If we don't get that, we can't treat it.
I think the accurate diagnosis is so important because a lot of things look like bipolar. And there's, of course, borderline, which has been confused for a long time. We didn't have a bipolar diagnosis 30 years ago. Unless you were severe bipolar 1, it slipped through the cracks. But ADHD can look like bipolar. And then you can treat the ADHD, and they're fine for a while, and then you're having problems. Well, why? It was misdiagnosed, or there was comorbidity. You can have ADHD and bipolar. Addictions. I mean, people self-medicate. Addictions not only can mask what you're looking at, they can trigger a manic or bipolar episode. So there's so much to look at, and it takes time. It's not an immediate diagnosis, unfortunately.
Let's get her a question. She doesn't need the mic.
I was just wondering, what if you have a feeling that someone might be bipolar, but that person is not willing to go see anyone? You confronted them already, and they won't even hear it. But you see all the signs, you read up on it, and you really suspect that they have it, and you want to help. What can you do in that?
So everyone hear the question? So so really it's the thin end of the wedge. So whatever works, whatever inroad will help. Often, it's not a psychiatrist. Often it's, the primary care doctor, the PCP, maybe offering to go visit their primary care doctor with them, or their psychotherapists who they go to once a week to talk about their life. Now, you have to assess how serious and how dangerous the person is too. If this person is acting out and has very high-risk behaviors and has multiple self-harm attempts or is really actively hallucinating, which is psychosis, then you have to take some other methods, which are really, hey, I need to call emergency services because this is scary and this person's at risk of really harming themselves. So, but creating a relationship of care is really the first, a background of concern and care. And they have to know that you don't want to lock them up. You don't want to force them to do anything. You don't want to push them into anything. But that you have a background of concern and love, and you are there for them. And slowly, you know, you can perhaps accompany them to some and give them enough psychoeducation so they can really begin to engage and see that these are treatable diseases. This is not 20, 30 years ago. People are sick of being out of commission. They want to get on with their lives. They generally see a doctor, see a therapist, want to get on with their lives and return to treatment, return to life. Excuse me.
I just need to count the live stream. Folks, I'm very sorry to interrupt, but I understand it's time for me to say goodbye to the live stream audience on the internet. Not to you, just the folks. So for those of you watching at home, there's still time to call the number on your screen. You could purchase a copy of Joan's book. We will get it signed for you, and we will ship it to wherever you are in the U.S. free of charge. For those of you here in the house, the Q&A is going to continue. The panel discussion is going to continue. I'm just saying good afternoon to our internet audience watching at home. Thank you. Please, go right ahead.